because if we're all divided, fighting with each other, we don't see what's going on behind closed doors, and their evil agendas can be pushed. They want a one world government. They want a one world currency. They want this new world order. That's biblical, brother, right? And if we can be fighting amongst each other, then they can get their evil deeds out.
And we need to get leftist indoctrination out of our media and out of our education system, because they're the ones really indoctrinating our children as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why they try to shut people down, is because they don't want to have that argument, because they don't think they can win it. That's really what it is. It's like, I'm not going to argue this with you. I'm just going to say that you're a horrible person, and your argument should not even be heard because you're terrible and I'm morally superior to you. And that's how the left operates.
Now, don't put a target on your back, but also don't shy away in the shadows. Find out what you can do. Maybe
if you're ignited and fired up and you're listening, get in the game, get in office, run for whether it's mayor, senator, Congress, sheriff, you name it, go for it. If you have an
Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of Freedom One-on-One. This is an interview show that I host, pretty regularly. I think I've been doing like 2, 3, sometimes 4 interviews a week. That's in addition to my morning show, Let's Talk Right Now, where I come to you guys every single morning, 10 a.m. Pacific time, Monday through Friday, breaking down the news from my perspective. Again, like, I never watch the news. I never watch Fox News. Maybe it's a little hypocritical for me to expect you guys to pay attention to what I've got to say, but at the same time, I'm going straight to the source and then trying to convey that to you guys as best as I can. So make sure you guys tune into that. Also, before we get started and I introduce our guest for today, I wanted to remind you guys, we have our own coffee company. It's called Freedom First Coffee. It literally tastes like freedom. It's 100% organic. It's fire roasted, and it tastes literally the best tasting coffee you will have. It's not bitter, not acidic. Go to freedomfirstcoffee.com. Use code Jeff at checkout. You will get 10% off at $17.76 a bag. But sign up on auto ship. It'll be $15 for every single bag, and you'll save even more by using code Jeff. So definitely check that out, freedomfirstcoffee.com. Okay, so without further ado, wanted to bring on our guest for today. We've got a former elections attorney and editor over at Intellectual Conservative. We've got Rachel Alexander joining us. Rachel, thanks so much for joining Freedom One-on-One. Really excited to have you on.
Oh yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It's good meeting you.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like one of the reasons I wanted to have you on too was because you understand all this stuff to a certain degree with what's going on with like the elections and the processes. Being a former elections attorney, especially out in Maricopa County, kind of a lot of chaos and craziness going on over there. But for people that maybe they don't know your background, what were you actually doing in regards to like election, and what does an elections attorney actually do?
Oh, okay. Besides the stuff you see in court, all the dramatic things where you cover hearings and, file legal pleadings, a lot of the stuff you do is just small little things. Like, let's say you get a complaint about a poll worker who is behaving inappropriately. You have to figure out, what do you do about that poll worker? You look up the law, you look up the rules, and then you get back to your client, who's the elections director. Maricopa County elections director was my client, and then all the employees underneath her. So you're handling a lot of, I would say, like, almost administrative stuff. The court stuff doesn't even happen until right before the election, and especially right after the election. For the most part, you're doing pretty more mundane, tame things.
Okay, yeah, definitely. And I think one of the biggest things that we've been watching, specifically about Arizona, and then we can kind of deal with some of the other stuff, is that I don't know if the general public, maybe people outside of Arizona, really understand what's being contested. I feel like, and you and I were kind of talking a little bit about this before, but I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I feel like everybody's just automatically assuming every single lawsuit out there discussing is strictly election fraud in general, everywhere. There's no specifics. There's no nuance or anything like that. Specifically in Arizona, what's your focus when it comes to the problem with the election?
In Arizona, we were specifically focusing on mainly these ballots that were returned without signatures being verified. And another one of the main complaints we had here was ballots that just appeared out of nowhere that were being returned. So, right, there are, specifics in each different election challenge. And I need to remind people, a lot of these lawsuits aren't even being filed by Trump's people. So when you hear that, we're losing here, we're losing there, well, a lot of these are brought by third-party organizations, and who knows how valid some of these challenges are. I mean, I've looked at some of the issues some of the other organizations are focusing on, and I wouldn't focus on them either, because they're not necessarily going to tip the election. It's one thing if you saw someone who said, yeah, I felt like, we weren't allowed to see what was going on in that room. Us poll watchers were told to leave. Okay, well, that's horrible, but can you, my cat's knocking my computer over. Can you, say how many votes that would have affected? And because if not, you're just wasting the court's time. And like the left says, this isn't going to get anywhere.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think even with the poll watchers, obviously there's the question about, what does that actually mean to observe an election? Because I think a lot of times, it seems like the observers were pushed off into a corner far away from where they were even counting the ballots. Is that a legitimate concern, or is it, hey, they were in the room, so it's perfectly okay?
It is a legitimate concern, especially if you've got rules, regulations, and laws that say there must be these poll watchers. In fact, when they say, the left says, oh, well, the federal district court judge, ruled, or the state court judge, whatever, that, there was nothing wrong here, and you should have filed this lawsuit before now, or whatever flimsy excuse they use. How they should have ruled on the law is they should have said, because there was no poll watchers, for this counting that went on, then you must redo the ballots. You must redo, have the election be done again in this county or this state or whatever. That's how all these judges should be ruling. So I just get so sick and tired of the left saying, no, the judge said, this is the way the law is. No, we would be having massive, redone elections.
Have we had like a redone election, like what you're talking about, for something like this? Has that ever been done before? Because I know I keep hearing people talking about that, but has that actually been actually done?
Oh yeah, it's been done in the past. What they like to argue is it didn't overturn the election results when you have had these things redone. And it's true. That's true, because it's been in cases where they didn't have the numbers. And so this is different, though. We've got the numbers. We can, order it to be redone again. The problem is, and I've been saying this for years about the courts, they are run by the left. And whether it's left-wing judges or rhino Republicans, here in Arizona, we have had a problem for many years. I used to run a site reviewing the judges back in 2009, 2010. And we have governors here who were Republicans who appointed these rhino judges. We don't even know what political party they are, because, we don't report stuff like that. And one of my goals in the future is to have a national site that reviews judges and it discloses their party. Because, this Jane Hull, this rhino Republican governor we had here for many years, she put so many liberal judges in. I mean, they might have well just been Democrats.
Yeah, well, and that seems like a major problem, especially when it comes to judges and things like that. Because I know even out here in California, we'll vote on particular judges or particular things, and it's like we have no idea anything about the background. I've got to go look on the OC GOP website to see who they recommend, and then you're just kind of blindly trusting. And that's the hard part about having an actual election. You're voting for people, you have no clue what they stand for, what they do, what they believe in, and things like that. And then when you take away the party affiliation, even on top of that, I don't even know how people are supposed to decipher how to pick a judge.
It's worse than you think, because in a lot of states like Arizona, we don't elect our judges when they first run for office. We appoint them. So basically, you have no knowledge. You don't know anything about this judge because the governor just happened to appoint them, right? And so then they run for these bogus retention elections here, where because they're already in office, incumbents always get reelected. So they don't even run campaigns. I don't know a single judge in Arizona in the Superior Court or the Court of Appeals that has ever run a campaign. because they blindly always get reelected. And so this has been a goal of mine for years. And as soon as I get my fact checking site going and make money off of that, because that's the real money maker, then I'm going to start a judge review site.
Yeah, well, you know, and I think specifically when we're dealing with like this election as well, again, like you were mentioning earlier, it seems like a lot of the lefties, a lot of the Democrats are pointing out, well, you know, a lot of these cases are getting shut down. Sidney Powell's case out in Georgia got shut down, claiming what was the judge claiming? That like she should have filed it before the election, even though everything that she seems to be citing is looking at stuff that happened during, like, it made no logical sense to me when I saw what the judge was saying there, especially after having read her actual lawsuit. But what do you make of that? Is that specifically with Sidney Powell? Was that a legitimate like overturning and shutting down, or was that seemed a little bit more biased there?
That was horrendous. Okay, I just got done reading the challenge filed by Texas to the Supreme Court suing 4 other states for their election fraud. And they cite a U.S. Supreme Court case which says you can't bring these election challenges before the election because you don't know how the election's going to turn out. You don't know that the fraud is actually going to be implemented yet. You don't know who's going to win. You know, if the Democrats have decided not to do all of this fraud, then there would be no reason for these lawsuits. So how is Sidney supposed to know to bring the lawsuit before the election?
Yeah, and that's the really hard part in all of this is that there's so many different things that are being thrown out there, and again, mainstream media doesn't help because that's a whole other chaotic, crazy mess that's going on there. But at a certain point, I think that obviously the Democrats, and just everyday Democrats, seem to think that, okay, this election is wrapped up. Trump is just acting like a baby, just complaining. He's going to lock himself in the Oval Office. They're going to have to kick down the door and drag him out, kicking and screaming like a little kid. But then you start getting the conservatives that I feel like there's a lot of conservatives that are beginning to lose heart and lose faith in the Trump team to actually deal with this. Are you confident that they're going about this the right way when it comes to these lawsuits and what they're pursuing?
You know, I think I am. I think there had to have been some coordination between Trump's team and this brilliant Texas lawsuit that was filed, because that seems to be the way to go. And now you've got Trump himself intervening and filing his own brief in that lawsuit. So I do think in that sense it was smart. And then when he cut off Sidney, that kind of worried me a little bit at first because, she's so brilliant and I've actually been writing about her for years. She's very credible, unlike what the left is making her out to be. It's ridiculous. I mean, I'm a partisan hack political lawyer. She's not. She's actually a really decent, fair, regular attorney. And so what they're making her out to be is ridiculous. But anyway, I think by Trump cutting her off and letting her go up with her own avenue, that might have actually been smart because, she's going to keep the base and she's going to, keep fulfilling a need where we need to expose that type of election fraud. But the left is going to be so focused on her that they kind of, don't have time to go back and focus all of their attention on Trump's lawsuits. So I actually think that was probably a brilliant maneuver.
Yeah, it was interesting too because when I first saw that the Trump team was kind of separating from Sidney, or at least kind of creating that division, my first thought was number one, okay, did they feel like she's going too far conspiratorially? So that was one concern. The other one that I was kind of looking at is there some jealousy? Is there some competition between Jenna Ellis and Sidney because Sidney's kind of taken the limelight and taken the focus and all of that? So that was my other thought process. But then as we're kind of looking at this, you're seeing Sidney's going after not just Democrats. She's going after Republicans too, specifically in Georgia. And that seems to be something that like the Trump team themselves aren't willing to do. It could be PR, could just be, it wouldn't look good for a sitting president to go after his own party. Whereas Sidney can kind of go off and do her own thing a little bit because she's been making some crazy accusations against Kemp and the Secretary of State out in Georgia. And in all reality, it seems like they're kind of panning out. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And I don't even think I thought it through that far, but I think you're onto something there. And she's that's a good way to put it. She can go off and she can make the accusations that the Trump team can't get away with, but the rest of us sitting on the sidelines, we can tell there's something fishy going on with the leadership of Republicans in Georgia. So it's a very clever maneuver. And, I have gone from thinking that Trump had, a 30% chance of winning, recently in the last, week or two. But I have got that up to at least a 40% chance based on, this Texas lawsuit and all the clever maneuvers he's making. I mean, you've got the MSM against him. You've got all the lower courts, against him. And so he's got these horrendous odds and this perception to overcome, which has been so difficult the last couple of weeks. But if he can just get past that and he can just get to the Supreme Court, which he's, finally now sort of there. I mean, they haven't said they're not going to hear the Texas case, and even the Pennsylvania case, they haven't said they're not going to hear it. That, they only ruled against the request for an injunction. So things may finally be turning around, and we can get into this more, but in the briefs filed by Texas, I mean, they go over why things like this December 14th deadline, when the states certify the electors, those aren't final. Nothing is final. The Supreme Court can vacate all of that. Even the January 6th date for Congress to agree to the state's electors, the Supreme Court can vacate that. And the brief even goes as far as saying even inauguration day, you can still look into the fraud.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because again, it's going directly in contradiction with what the mainstream media is telling us. Like when you look at the articles and things that I see, going down my Twitter feed or whatever it is, and I'm looking at these headlines, you're like, they're literally saying this is essential. There's nothing that the Trump team can do. They're just crying. They're just whatever it is. It's really interesting, but especially too with this Texas lawsuit, it seems like this one, the Trump team and Trump himself seems to be saying, this is the big one. This is the one that has the best shot at actually overturning this election. What is it, at least from your understanding, that separates this Texas lawsuit from the others that have been pursued up to this point?
Well, okay, first of all, they've got an awesome argument for standing to make the Supreme Court take the case. They've really laid out the law so well, saying, look, you've got state versus state here. That's the type of case that the Supreme Court takes. You've got a constitutional issue here, but they spelled it out in such detail. The constitutional issue is the electoral clause of the Constitution, which says the state legislatures get to make the laws regarding elections, the presidential elections. So, they're specifically saying, okay, you have all these governors and these election, heads who have made up these laws regarding the election. They have taken this jurisdiction away from state laws. They're violating state laws. So that's the constitutional issue. And then the standing issue, they've tried to draft it really cleverly here by saying, it's state versus state, because not only are you taking away us conservative states who voted for Trump, you're taking away our votes, but what about the fact that the Senate represents us as states? Our senators represent us, and you've now taken away our vote for vice president, and the vice president would determine a tie in the case of a Senate vote. And so they've got those two genius angles. And then the fraud that they list out is, excellent, going right down to, we just heard this study come out a couple days ago about that professor who said, there's less than 1 in a quadrillion chance that Biden could have won in these 4 swing states after the numbers have been coming in election evening. At that point, there's no way he could have won. They've even included details like that. They've included so much stuff that the justices can't just ignore.
Yeah, well, and I think it was interesting. I was listening to Steven Crowder's show this morning, and he was actually interviewing the Attorney General from Texas, and it was really interesting hearing him explain all this. But also, the one thing that he was saying was that the Supreme Court, this is their one shot, because if it's an issue between the states, they have no other recourse. Like, you don't go to like a state Supreme Court when it's an issue between the states. That's got to be a Supreme Court issue. And then the question becomes, does the Supreme Court have to take this case? I mean, is this something where the Supreme Court could decide, yeah, you know what, we're not even going to hear the arguments?
Well, the complaint has noticed similar examples in the past where there have been very similar cases like this. And, one was, I'm trying to think if I can remember, but they were basically similar examples where the Supreme Court has taken them. So if the Supreme Court doesn't take this case, it's going to be going against its own precedent.
Yeah, well, in this is where it's pretty crazy too, because we've got, what is it, 22 states now, 23 states kind of coming alongside Texas. But from what I remember hearing, at least this morning, with the Attorney General speaking to Crowder, it doesn't seem like they're not necessarily involved in the lawsuit itself. How does all that work from like the legal standpoint? They're almost like showing that their support for the case. Is that how this all works out?
Yeah, I mean, you can have parties to a lawsuit, but you can also have amicus curiae. And amicus curiae just means you're like a friend of the lawsuit, or you have a different angle. You're joining in on the lawsuit, but you have your own angle. And so these states are pretty much all, filing these amicus curiae briefs. But in my legal opinion, it has as much weight. Excuse me. It has as much weight as if it was a party, and these justices are going to look at these amicus curiae briefs as much as they would a party to the lawsuit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think too, like when we're looking at this specific lawsuit, it seems like a lot of what they're focusing on is the changing of the rules last minute specifically by like the governors and the secretaries of state, when it constitutionally it should be done by the legislative branch when it comes to the rules for the election and all that kind of stuff. And again, a lot of these details are things that the left seem to completely ignore, and just like even out here in California, we had Governor Newsom. He came out and he changed the whole thing to where every single registered voter in the state of California would get a mail-in ballot. And then after the election, we had a judge come in and say, "Yeah, Gavin, you shouldn't have done that. That's actually illegal." But there's no recourse. Doesn't change anything. But it seems like that's also what happened in some of these other states. I mean, do you think that like the specific fact that they did that, is that enough to like invalidate the election? Is that enough to change anything? Like, will that actually change anything?
Yeah, it should, because I mean, we are talking about a very important right, the right to vote. And that's what's being infringed upon. And so a typical remedy, and we've seen it in the past when courts have ordered recounts, is new elections technically. That is a very common remedy. And here there is precedent for it. The left could say, "Oh, this is completely ridiculous to overturn an election based on this," but the courts have already ruled in the case of it was like something versus Cuomo, Catholic churches versus Cuomo. Some of these changes that he made based on the COVID virus violated state law, and he could not have made these. And the Supreme Court's already ruled against him on that. So you can't go back and try to change state laws because of COVID. And that's what they tried to do. They said, "Well, we mailed out all these absentee ballots with no signature verification, no photo ID." And, in some states, like I think Wisconsin, where they required things like that because of COVID. No, you can't subvert a constitutional right that has been delegated to be taken care of by the state legislature because of a health disaster. Health disasters do not outweigh the Constitution. And that's, a huge part of the argument in these Texas complaints.
Yeah, I mean, last I checked, there wasn't like an exception clause in the Constitution of the United States, and that's been my biggest critique of Gavin Newsom out here in California. Is it's like he's taken away our constitutional rights when it comes to our right to peaceably assemble. Our right to practice our religion as we see fit, like all these kinds of things, all in the name of like safety. But last I checked, it's still in the Constitution. He doesn't have the authority to take those kinds of things away. And I think the same thing goes for here. Now, I wanted to throw a question from you from somebody who's posting. And it's interesting, too, because for me, so a lot of people, they don't like to deal with the trolls. They like to ignore them. I like to approach them head on, because what's been interesting, especially during this election time, is that the trolls are actually throwing out just regular mainstream lefty talking points that need to be overcome. Because again, I'm out here in California, can't walk 10 feet without bumping into a liberal. I hear what they're saying, and literally they're repeating everything that all the trolls on Twitter are saying. So I'm going to throw one of these questions at you, and I want to hear your thoughts. So this guy on Periscope said, so he made it easier for everyone to vote, so meaning the governor. He made it easier for everyone to vote, and you were arguing it was an infringement on that right. How do we overcome that kind of line of thinking?
Well, you are violating the Constitution by making it easier to vote, because the Constitution says that the legislatures get to decide how easy it is to vote. So if you really want to make it easier to vote, well, you've got to go to your state legislature and get it changed. And, a good argument in that brief from Texas was that my stupid TV just flashed on it, distracted me. But just because you don't like the Constitution and you see it as a living document and you want to get rid of it, doesn't mean that you can ignore it now. We have to stick by the Constitution right now. And, if you don't like the laws being delegated to the state legislature and you want to delegate them to the governor, then go ahead, amend the Constitution and have things be delegated to the governor instead.
Yeah, well, and that's been one of my main points too, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because that's been one of my main points talking to lefties when I go on their shows is like, okay, so like if you want universal health care or you want to change the Electoral College, you want to change anything you want. That's the beauty. It is a living document in that sense. We can change it, but you got to go through the process. If you can't go through the process, you got to follow the law. Otherwise, you're pushing illegal behavior. It's illegal, can be prosecuted. Like it's common sense, and that's the thing that I think a lot of the left misses, and even a lot of Republicans too. I don't want to leave the Republicans out because I've been very critical of the GOP in all of this. You got to remember the Constitution is the law of the land, and I think that right now the majority of people see it as like some guidelines, some things that it's like ideals, but we don't really have to follow them, because we got to be more pragmatic. It's living. We can reinterpret it. I mean, at what point can we reinterpret it, or is it the law of the land no matter what?
Well, I think some things you can't interpret. And, we can get into a whole argument over how much you can reinterpret. But the Electoral College is really clear. That clause says the legislature shall decide how elections shall be conducted. So I don't see how you can get around that and allow Gavin Newsom and these other governors to subvert that. And, the left keeps saying, well, it's up to the courts to decide this. And they've loved using that line because all the lower courts are going to rule in their favor. But, what about when it comes to the Supreme Court? What are they going to say then? Or, they say it's up to the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution. So I'm dying to hear what they're going to come up with as an excuse to say the Supreme Court was wrong. But I will tell you this, I have to say this. I was influenced several years ago when I heard the late Andrew Breitbart, before he died, talking at a conference. And he said, it doesn't matter if Chardonnay 358, who has 3 followers on Twitter, is arguing with you, you got to debate back. And I've just respected that guy so much that every time these leftists try to, engage me on Twitter or Facebook, I can't resist. And I got to tell you, it is one of my favorite things to do. I actually enjoy it. And that could be because I'm good at logic. So I'm actually, I feel like that's a weakness on our side. We don't know how to refute the left back. They come at us with all these brilliant emotional arguments, and we're sitting there like quoting facts and statistics back to them. And that's not how you argue back with them. I always think you just got to out clever them and come up with a more clever argument. And, as I told you earlier, one of my pet peeves is how we keep, bringing up, this poor gym owner, and, this is terrible what COVID is doing to them. And while it is awful what's happening to the gym owners, the MSM is focusing on them deliberately because they know that's our weakest argument. Old people dying is their argument versus, this poor gym owner. No. We have to bring up the kids that are committing suicide because of the lockdowns. We need to be focusing on things like that. The mainstream media won't focus on that, but it's on us to start pointing out things like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I'm totally with you too. And that's where I think That's where I think Trump actually did a very good job when he was running in 2016 specifically, was that you had all of the rest of the Republicans were up on stage, and I love Ted Cruz. I think he's great. I'll give him props as well. He's like the only Republican senator or elected congressman right now that's actually willing to take a stand for election fraud. Like, I don't know of very many others that are actually doing anything, so I at least applaud him on that. But during the 2016 primaries, all the Republicans were up there. Here's my 47-step plan to fix illegal immigration. Here's my 30-step plan in order to bring peace in the Middle East. And then Trump comes in, he's like, I'll build a wall and we'll deport illegals. 2 steps, we're good. But at the same time, he also focused on, here's the people that are dying because of illegal immigration. Here's the people that are getting smuggled across. He understood that emotional argument of the left in a way that Republicans didn't. And I think that that's really how he's been able to wake people up to where, in all reality, we did have a red wave this election. And I think Trump did that specifically through a lot of his emotional arguments that a lot of Republicans have been criticizing him for making.
Absolutely. And, you just look at other approaches. I think the approach with blacks has been absolutely brilliant. That was a vision of his where he saw that everybody was going to, legalize marijuana, and now they're legalizing hard drugs. Who even saw that coming, But he saw all this coming and he realized, I'm going to get out ahead of it. And I'm going to get rid of all these hardcore, drug laws and, start pardoning people. And that is going to help with the black vote. And, because he was thinking outside of the box and he wasn't thinking like a typical conservative, for years we just had conservatives that just wanted to, throw the book at drug crimes. And because he was able to see it in a different light, he was able to, outsmart the left.
Yeah, that's really true. Now, what do you make of the fact that Republicans have not been coming to Trump's defense here? Because I feel like ever since, so in 2016, Republicans, obviously, they turned their back on Trump. They were going hardcore to get him, make sure that he wasn't the nominee. And then there was a really big never Trump movement within the Republican Party. Even guys like Glenn Beck, Ben Shapiro, all these guys who eventually kind of turned around and came back over to his side. But then you have, everybody was giving lip service to saying, Trump, because I think really they were looking at the poll saying 95% approval rating with Republicans. Not a popular thing to go against that. But now they're all silent. Nowhere to be seen. It's like they're leaving them out to dry. What's going on, do you think, with the Republican leadership in regards to Trump right now?
Well, after having worked for an elected official for 5 years as a political appointee, and having seen the left go after him and destroy him and me as collateral damage as well, I do know a thing or two about what is going on with elected officials and the choices they make. And basically what they're doing is they are preserving their own political futures. They are putting their own political future ahead of helping out someone who's being targeted and thrown under the bus. And they've already done the calculations because they're talking to lobbyists. They're talking to big corporate interests. They're talking to the billionaire conservatives who have money. This is who is in their circle and who's influencing them. And they're all saying, get off the ship. People are already starting to prosecute Trump. You've got that state attorney in New York who's already trying to get a grand jury to prosecute him. I mean, they're just absolutely salivating. And so these rhino Republican leaders have made the calculation that Trump's probably going to lose. And so they're just trying to, protect themselves at this point. A lot of these people, they're narcissists in office. They don't have principles like we do. They know how to talk the talk. They know how to get the talking points out. And, once they get into office, they sometimes do some conservative things so we can rally around them. But for the most part, I think a large percentage, and I should really do research and figure it out, of people in office are just narcissists. So it all comes down to them. It's not about preserving the Republican dream. It's not about, stopping felonies. For them, it's where do they go next? What angle do they take next? It's chess moves. They're very good at chess moves.
Yeah, well, and I think that one of the other things too is that it seems like before Trump came, Republicans and Democrats used to always be fighting with each other, but they never actually fixed anything, right? And so, and I always use the example of illegal immigration, right? You had the Republicans that would talk about strong border security, and then the Democrats that was always more open borders and accept the illegals and make them citizens and all that kind of stuff. But they never actually accomplish anything. They'd fight with each other and then they'd go raise money off of the fight. It's like they had to have the fight in order to get reelected. And then Trump comes in, he's like, I'll build a wall. Problem solved. We're good. And he's taking away their ability to get reelected or raise money because he's actually solving problems. He had the lowest black unemployment rate in like the history of the United States. He was fixing the illegal immigration problem. Oh crap, we've got peace in the Middle East. I mean, it's something that nobody thought that we would see. He was actually fixing problems. And I wonder if there's a certain aspect of they want to go back to business as usual and just get back to fighting, not solving problems, but it's a way for them to hold on to power.
Absolutely, and it's disgusting because, like you said, it happens on both sides. The Democrats hate him because he's getting so much accomplished, and the Republicans hate him because he's undermining all their established stuff. And believe me, I can tell you, I've heard from people how they resent Trump just completely spinning their message and their the way they had it all under control. And Trump is just going about it his own way. He's not listening to them. He's they think he's undermining them. And I'm like, are you kidding me? He has done so much more for the conservative movement than anyone. People keep saying he's better than Ronald Reagan. And, you should be praising this. You should be happy. And no, they are control freaks. And believe me, I've worked with enough people in the conservative industry at this point. A lot of them are control freaks. You don't want them as your boss. They are going to do it their way or the highway. And Trump came in and interrupted all that. He didn't pay his dues. He didn't suck up to the right people. He didn't have to suck up to the billionaires, that usually fund a lot of conservative stuff, because he had his own money. And so I know exactly what's going on. And a lot of these people, they're eccentric. They're mentally ill. I mean, I hate to speak that way of people in my own party, but, maybe I'm getting older and I've just worked with too many Republican politicians. But a lot of it, you're just dealing with personalities. I mean, it comes down to personalities, and a lot of them just want the money. And it's not even a conspiracy necessarily. It's just people are just irritating to work with. The more you get into this, you find so many of them like that.
I know. Well, it's literally like there's the swamp. It's what Trump's been talking about this entire time. It needs to be drained, and I think that in all reality, when it comes to Trump, I think that when he got to DC, I think he realized that the deep state is actually deeper than he thought. The swamp is worse than he thought. It's a lot more difficult to take out, and I'm praying that this election will be the thing that actually unravels all of that, because I have this theory that if we can just pull this one thread and fully expose this election fraud that was going on, whether it's Dominion, whether it's dealing with communist China, whatever it might be, we can just pull that one string. I really believe that the whole thing will unravel, because it seems like everything's connected. The lockdowns led to the mail-in ballots, which led to the voter fraud. The whole thing seems like it's one big giant conspiracy. And I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but at the same time, it seems like the whole system is like connected. I don't know. Am I just totally off my rocker wearing a tinfoil hat?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, after being in politics for years, and now I've been in the media for years, I think there's always a grain of truth to a lot of these conspiracies. And the problem is you get these people who are just hyper emotional, and they're not the type to do much investigative research, and they just go with some angle of the conspiracy that's really out there, and they run with it, and then everyone just focuses on that and how ridiculous it is. So nobody ever gets to the bottom of it. Nobody ever looks to see if there might be some truth to it. And the reality is, yeah, there's a lot of different angles of this kind of stuff that actually can be true. And like I've said about the mainstream media for years, it doesn't matter if there is a big conspiracy or not. the fact is you have 95% left-wingers in media. They all have, the same goal of ripping Republicans, destroying Republicans, making the Democrats look good. And so they could all be working independently. It frankly doesn't matter. They're still gonna have the same effect as if there was a conspiracy. Okay, maybe not quite as great of an effect if they weren't so coordinated. Okay, let's all use these talking points in our articles. But it doesn't matter. It's powerful. It's huge. It's a problem. And so, yeah, I think, like you're saying, there probably is some angle to, some of these masterminds doing chess behind it, figuring out, COVID would do the lockdowns and then we'd have the mail-in ballots. I mean, sure, there's probably people who have thought of that, but it doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter because they push this stuff even without a conspiracy.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Okay, so when we're looking ahead, and as we're beginning to wrap up here, but I want to look ahead. So we've got what, about a little over a month until Inauguration Day. Do you think that all these court cases and everything, do you think it's going to legitimately get dragged out until Inauguration Day? Do you feel like this is going to be a long drawn out fight, or do you feel like Sidney Powell and Texas or whoever it could be could expose this and get this wrapped up here quickly? What are you feeling? What are you thinking about the future?
My gut instinct, it all comes down to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court takes the Texas case, which I believe it will, and my reasoning behind that is actually because I know our Attorney General Brnovich here in Arizona. We used to have offices next to each other when we were assistant attorney generals for 3 years. And we go to happy hour all the time. So I know Brnovich very well. He would not have signed on to that case as an amicus curiae, and he's leading an amicus curiae with 20 other states. So he went out of his way to get 20 other states to sign on with him. He would not have done that unless he thought there was a very good chance the Supreme Court was going to take it and rule in our favor. Because you look at things he's done since he's been attorney general for, I don't know how many years. He's in his second term. He's cautious. He's not out there. He's not just taking every conservative thing, So that gives me hope that the Supreme Court is going to hear the case. And so then everything would depend on their schedule. And, they don't look like they're going to hurry it up within just a couple of days. I think, who knows, but it could take a couple of weeks. But regardless, they could put off that December 14th certification deadline as they're hearing oral arguments and whatnot. So who knows how long they could take, but I'm guessing they would wrap it up before Christmas.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. Okay. And then one final thing, I want you to overcome another troll comment if you can, because again, for me, it's fun. Okay. So one person said, and this is Perez T0069, very, very specific, without
like 358.
Exactly. There is no proof that there was any fraud. So when you're looking at this and you're talking to people, and again, this isn't the reason why I do this. This is literally the talking points of my lefty friends. They're like, why are you guys complaining? There's no fraud. There's zero evidence of fraud. Nothing. You guys are just complaining that you lost. Okay. For you, when you're looking at this election, what is it that would be the easiest thing to point out to people? This shows actual fraud.
The first thing, there's a lot, but the first thing would be, I've heard there's as many as 1,000 affidavits of people saying they have seen the fraud. Well, that's how millions of court cases are decided around the United States every year, is based on sworn witness testimony of wrongdoing. So boom, right there's all your evidence. 1,000 affidavits is incredibly overwhelming. This isn't just like 3 people saying they saw ballots being put through machines 60 times, the same ballots being put in a machine 60 times over and over and over again. What do they want? Do they want video evidence? We're still going to get to the video evidence because that's going to be obtained through court-ordered subpoenas that you get as the trial is going. So maybe we'll catch some of that on video. I don't know, but we don't even need the video evidence. If you can't accept an affidavit as evidence, then you can throw out millions of court cases throughout this country's history going back years and years and years.
Yeah, and that seems to me to be one of the craziest arguments, is that everybody says there's no evidence, there's no evidence, there's no evidence, and you're like, but testimony, last I checked, sworn testimony under threat of perjury is evidence. You may not agree with the conclusion, you may not agree with their perspective, or you may think, okay, there's some questions there, or whatever it is, but it's still evidence, right? Or am I totally off my rocker here?
There are so many people who have, been sentenced to death based on sworn testimony alone. And that's a huge standard. That's beyond a reasonable doubt standard, way higher than what we need here for ballot fraud. So for a super high standard, you put somebody on death row merely based on somebody's testimony. I mean, I don't understand what is even better evidence than that. There's not much better. I mean, okay, you're not going to have DNA evidence in a voter ballot fraud, trial, because that doesn't really exist. That's, when you kill someone or you steal something. I mean, so it doesn't even apply, but that's usually like considered the best, evidence standard that you need is that. But I mean, what else could you give that's even more damning than that? I mean, I don't understand in this type of a trial, in this type of.
I feel like the Democrats need a selfie video from the CEO of Dominion Voting Systems saying, "I rigged the election and I approve this message." That's literally what they need. Otherwise, it doesn't count.
Yeah, and I keep thinking more too. Like, what about those Native Americans who were given, gift cards for voting for Biden? And they took photos of their gift cards and bragged about getting them for voting for Biden on social media. Okay, what about that? Have you heard any Democrats refute that?
No, the refutation is that there wasn't enough of those to overturn the election, so it doesn't count. This is 2020, where you can literally have video evidence. Like when I was watching that Atlanta video footage of what was going on there in the arena, and it perfectly corresponded with the sworn affidavits down to the minute and time of when they left versus when they came back and what was happening and everything. And then the Secretary of State said, "What you're seeing here is not what you're seeing." He's like, "Everything here is legit." That was when I was like, okay, this goes deeper. And this goes into, it's not just the Democrats that are the problem. It goes into, it's the Republicans as well. It's the GOP. We can't just blame the Democrats for everything. It's the establishment, elite politicians in DC and in each of these states. There's something deep going on, in my opinion. I think, I'm praying that people like Sydney and Rudy can really root this out.
Well, they were saying in Georgia that, the leadership there, the GOP leadership, they were getting kickbacks or corporate donations for accepting to go with those voter machines there. So, follow the money there. And by the way, I mean, I was just thinking of another hardcore example that I have not heard the Democrats refute, which was here in Arizona, when they did a spot check of ballots, they found, at least a couple from just a small spot check, the votes were changed and went to Biden instead of Trump. I haven't heard any Democrats challenging that. Their argument there is just, well, that's not enough. You need more than that to, overturn the election. But still, like you're saying, I mean, it's still evidence. That's hardcore evidence, and they are not disputing that votes were changed for Biden. So, my gosh, and they haven't even gotten the permission to do a larger check to see if there's more, to see if there's enough that would, potentially change the election. So we're not even there yet to their other argument.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's one of those things where it seems like the irrationality of the left and the mainstream, and even again some of our own within the Republican Party, it seems like it's never ending. They're never going to accept any kind of challenge or anything along those lines. But that's where I feel like we need to have more of these kinds of conversations and actually break this kind of stuff down. And that's why I think that this kind of thing is so important. But Rachel, if people want to follow you or, your writing or whatever it is that you're working on, what's the best way for them to follow you and get more information?
You can find my columns at townhall.com, and my personal website is Intellectual Conservative, and follow me Well, I'm on a lot of social media now, so I probably shouldn't even be saying this anymore. Follow me on Twitter, but there's a lot of activity going on there. So I'm Rach_IC on Twitter.
Okay, definitely. And then yeah, we'll make sure we put all the links to all of that in the show notes as well. But Rachel, I really appreciate you coming on. I had a blast. We'll definitely have you back on sometime. But I got to say, 2020 has been absolutely insane, and this election has been insane. I don't think any of us predicted any of this, but we got to figure out what the heck happened so that we make sure this never happens ever again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for taking the time, because you need a full hour just to go over some of this stuff.
I think we need 3, but you know what? it's crazy. So, but yeah, Rachel, again, I really appreciate it. Everybody else as well. Make sure that you guys subscribe and then Apple Podcast, that way you guys are notified every time we come out with a new show. We're coming out with new shows all the time, and then also stay tuned. So come back right here in about a half an hour. We've got a new episode of the Federalist Faction hosted by my good friend Schumann. Tonight they're going to be having actually on a progressive lefty on tonight, so they're gonna have a fun conversation there. Federalist Faction is every single Thursday at 6:30 Central Time, so make sure you guys tune into that. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we shall catch you guys